Hello and welcome to the latest episode of my 2023 Rugby World Cup preview series. Today we switch things up by looking at three nations at once, the Pacific Island nations of Tonga, Samoa and Fiji. There's no one better to bring on to discuss this than hosts of the Tier 2 focused Pirate Rugby Podcast, Hugh Griffin and Enda and Huw. Welcome on, lads.
Thanks for having me. Delighted to be here.
Pleasure to be here, Caelan.
Good to have you on, lads. And I start all these things the same way. Although I didn't ask you when you were on for last week's Owen Farrell high tackle debate, but the World Cup preview is nearly over. The hype is rising, etc., etc. Are you getting excited? And I'll start with yourself, Enda.
Absolutely, especially from an Irish perspective, it's impossible not to, especially hear about all the horrific injuries from the weekend and everything and the shock Farrell decision. But Ireland were in Portugal, living their best life, and I'm pretty glad they were. I know Ireland are playing. I think it's only three official warm games, and then most of the other Northern Hemisphere teams are playing 4, I believe. So, yeah, this past weekend is kind of driven that home. So, but yeah, from our perspective, really excited for the tournament. I can't wait till it starts. Ireland going in as number 1 seeds as well, coming off a Grand Slam win. I can't wait. And even with Entomac's, injury, France is still going to be an absolute joy to watch. Look at New Zealand's form. South Africa, we know we're going to show up. Some of the tier 2 sides are doing better, as we'll discuss. Yeah, really can't wait.
And the same question to you. I know you're a Welsh fan, so people would spare you if you weren't as excited. But to be fair, you did beat England and Cardiff. So what way are you lying?
Well, being tied to a train track with a train coming at you is exciting. Which is kind of how I feel, which we'll talk about when we get into the show. Yeah, from a Wales point of view, nervous, more nervous about every other opponent in our pool apart from Australia. Funnily enough, based on how the summer's been going so far. I was gutted about Ntamack's injury. I would be in favour of postponing the World Cup until he gets fit again, because I just think he's that special. The anticipation is absolutely building for me.
No, it's fair, and I should probably add in that when this goes live, there could be another injury. Touch wood, there isn't, but there could be. Hopefully, Ntamack is the last high-profile one, and Cyril Baille as well, which in some ways is almost as bad for France. But anyways, you're excited, but we are going to talk about countries not very much close to you, but close to your hearts, and the Pacific Island nations. We're going to start with Tonga, seeing as they're in Pool B, alongside Ireland, Scotland, South Africa, and Romania. And then I'll come to you. You can take the men in red. Can you just take us through that high quality squad, the recent form, and all that? Because as we were discussing before we went live, a lot of people wouldn't have seen any of their games or even know what's going on, apart from the Fifitas and Fekitoa and that former Australian fullback playing for them.
Yeah, well, look, we all know about the changes that were introduced in terms of the eligibility rules, and I think Tonga are probably the squad that has benefited most from that. Now, I know we'll touch on this later, but their form hasn't really reflected that yet. Hopefully after Tuesday, I know this is going out next week, so at time of recording, they did have an easy enough win against Canada. But in terms of those players who are now eligible, like you're looking at Coleman, you're looking at Pete Aki, who obviously used to play for Connacht and now is with Toulouse. Absolutely phenomenal player. So he's really exciting. I can't wait to see him. We all know Charles Piutau, who obviously spent time in Ulster. So I think we're all excited to see him play. We've got not everybody's favorite and a very controversial figure in Israel Folau. We won't get into his background, but we all know how talented he is. Now, I'm not 100% sure if he's picked up an injury. I know he did play last week, but he wasn't in today's squad. So I'm not sure what the latest is on him, but we'll probably just move on from Folau. And then obviously you've got Fekitoa. And yeah, as a lot of your listeners and viewers will know, like what an end to the season with Munster he had after his maybe, I don't want to say ropey, but we all know he had a difficult enough start with Munster, but then he really came into form, particularly towards the end of the season. So again, really excited to see him perform for them as well. Then we also have Levi Fifita. Now obviously as a Connacht fan, I was delighted. Now he was a very long time, but it was only actually a long time out of contract. So obviously his contract with Connacht unfortunately wasn't renewed, but he only actually ended up with a contract, and so obviously it's going out Tuesday. So last week, and he got a contract from Oyna in the top 14. So there have been suggestions that he won't be appearing in the World Cup, which is very, very disappointing. But obviously you can understand like a player out of contract, we all know how difficult the market is at the moment. But apparently he mightn't be playing in the World Cup as a result of this. And now he has been playing in their most recent games. So we'll watch this space and fingers crossed we'll get to see him in action. And yeah, look, they've got multiple talents throughout their squad. In terms of kind of what do we expect from them, we can start off probably by looking at their pool. It's a very, very, very difficult pool. Like it's Pool B, so it's Ireland's group. It's the pool of death really. And their first game, I believe, is up against Scotland. Is that right? Or is it potentially Ireland?
It's Ireland on week 2.
It's Ireland, yeah. So I think, it's Ireland's week 1 and then Scotland, I think, the following week. Which
could be,
I suspect.
Just 2 seconds. I have it here in front of me. If I can just
open their opening game, I checked. Yeah, it's their second game is against Scotland. So I think that's the one they're really kind of be targeting.
Mm-hmm.
But in terms of them making it out of the pool, like if it like so they've got South Africa, they've got Ireland, they've got Italy, and maybe like with Scotland, we all saw in the recent French game how fantastic they are. We all know that, and I'm definitely of the opinion that Scotland can beat anybody on their day. But they're also notoriously inconsistent. So in terms of Tonga causing an upset there, maybe. And I think they'll definitely do a number on Romania because Romania's form has been poor, especially leading into the World Cup. So I'm really, unfortunately, it's definitely because of the strength of teams in that group. They're not going to get out, I don't think, and they've unfortunately never actually made it out of the group stages. But it's still great to see those players come back in. We'll get to see them on show. But unfortunately, I don't see them making out of the group.
Yeah, no, it would be something else if they did, but it does look like backs against the wall at the very least, especially with South Africa's pedigree. Ireland as were number 1, Scotland being, you feel like they are going to be good enough. You believe Scotland are a tier 2 team, so do you think in the battle between these tier 2 teams that Tonga could possibly turn them over?
Way to out me there, mate. But
I had to.
Yeah, I agree with Enda. I think especially their fixture list, Ireland, Scotland, South Africa, then Romania. I think by the time they come to play Romania, they're going to be beat. They don't have a rest week either to take the sting out of it.
They're
And unfortunately, of the 3 teams we're discussing tonight, I think Tonga are unfortunately the weakest of the Pacific Island nations. At the moment, they're new, I want to call them signings, but they're obviously not signings, but the new players haven't really clicked. And I think if you look at the positions that they are in, there's a lot of like back 3 players and back row players, which, if you're asking a coach to build a team, they're not necessarily the players they'd start with. So with the star names, and I hope obviously there's a couple of Scarlets guys in there with Lausi and Vea Fafita playing for them, but sadly I just think it's too early for them at the moment with the short time they've had to bring together. They don't play a lot of games to Tonga, and the games that they do play, so they've obviously beat Canada twice in a row now. The only other game they've won this World Cup cycle is against Australia A, which was earlier this year as well. So bless them. And like Enda said, never got out of their group, only ever won 8 World Cup matches. Yeah, I hope the best for them, but unfortunately, I think they're going to take a couple of hidings in the group stage.
Yeah, they were beaten quite heavily by Samoa as well a couple of weeks ago, which is unfortunate.
And Samoa are probably one that we'd be keeping an eye on in terms of the later stage of the group, or at least we hope. But Tonga, typically the weakest nation, and certainly by your expectations, don't see them getting out and continue that way. Huw, you're wearing a Fiji top. You are a lover of all things Fiji and rugby. To be fair, we all are. And they're also in Pool C alongside your native Wales, who are also joined by Australia, by Portugal, and by Georgia. I got that. Yeah, it is Portugal, isn't it?
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, I just had a mind blank there for a second. Apologies. Possibly the hardest pool. I know Enda said Pool B, but I really believe this is the toughest one. World rankings would agree. So when it comes to Fiji, have they any? I hate calling them signings, but new known faces in there, or do you want to just run over their squad in general and their pre-World Cup form?
So in terms of, we'll call them signings to keep it simple. No, not really, interestingly. So Fiji have got going into this World Cup what they never had before, which is a club team to build around with the Drua. So people who watch Super Rugby will know that we now have the Fijian Drua playing as one of the main teams in Super Rugby Pacific. And what that has given Fiji is, compared to when before, all of their players were spread across pretty much every major league in the world. They've now got the majority of players all playing not only in the same league, but for the same club. So out of their 33-man squad, 17, which is just over half, maths fans will tell you, is from the Drua. So they've got a core there and a group of players that are really exciting. The likes of Nasila Sila played every single game for the Drua, and including big wins. So they got to the playoffs in the Super Rugby and they beat the Crusaders in round 3, which send ripples throughout the sporting world. So they still got don't get me wrong, they still got the big name stars in there. Radradra is still there, Naya Salivu, Mainikolo, Sam Matavesi at hooker, which people will know from Northampton. So Botia, of course, everyone's favourite from La Rochelle. Yeah. So they haven't done any quote unquote recruitment really for this squad. They've really gone organic, you could almost call it. And I think that's what makes it, for me, extra exciting.
No, it certainly, it is an exciting squad on paper. I know maybe someone like Radradra, you might have doubts over his fitness, for instance, and Botia brings a certain caliber player, but could he possibly have, with his age and with the nature of top 14, could he come into this maybe a bit fatigued? But there's certainly excitement. But I put it to Brett McKay in an earlier episode. He reckons the Fiji and Drua is going to really lead them to something spectacular, similar, he reckons, to Japan in 2015, who famously kind of basically just trained together for a year before the World Cup, and that's kind of what these guys have in some way. But I suppose the big question is, from an Irish point of view, can Fiji upset the odds? Can they get out of the group? And we've mentioned a few times before, but they do play Wales in Bordeaux in round 1 in what could be a decider. I don't think it will be. I think there's going to be way more rugby to be played out than that, but could be a huge game for them. Can they topple Wales and get out of the group? Or Australia, I should add.
So if I flip the question slightly, are Wales capable of losing to Fiji? Yes, absolutely.
Yes. 2007.
Yeah, 2007. That's a long time ago. A lot of time, water under the bridge since then. But I think the good thing from Wales' point of view is Wales can target that game and to convince themselves that if we win that game, then we're off to a strong start. The thing about Fiji's fixtures is that it's all on the first 2 weeks. They've got Wales and then Australia. If they lose both those games, their World Cup is basically over already. And then they've got a rest week to stew on that. And then they play Georgia and then a final game against Portugal. And it's, I think I agree with you that it's the hardest pool in terms of the teams being at a reasonably even level. Georgia could be going into that game on week 4 with something really to play for. And if Fiji have got nothing to play for, then Fiji could unfortunately be looking at something disappointing. They've only won one game at each of the last 3 World Cups, which is a little bit surprising. And that includes slightly embarrassing defeats against Uruguay. And they lost to Samoa quite comfortably in 2011. But yeah, I think for me, like I said, it's all about those first 2 weeks. I think I was talking to an Australian fan today, and they said they feel that they're vulnerable to Fiji. I mean, if you talk about cohesion, there's more cohesion with Fiji than there is with Australia at the moment. And if Fiji have had the chance to blow off the cobwebs. Because they've got a good run up to the tournament as well. Because they've had the very confidence building Pacific Nations Cup, which they won easily, putting 30 points on everyone. And then they've got a game against France this weekend, and who knows what Team France are going to put out based on what happened against Scotland. So that's going to be worth tuning into. And then they've got England at Twickenham, and based on how England are going, I think for me, even if they don't win those two games, if they finish within a score of France and England away from home, and then they go into a game against a Wales team that's struggling to find its feet, they're going to be full of confidence. They've never had a better chance, in my opinion.
And you've teed it up nicely, and I'll get a final word on them in a minute. But when you look at the draw, it's very interesting of kind of like when the fixtures are and all that. It's obviously crucial. But you look at the last round of games, and like Wales against Georgia, that could decide whether Wales go through. You've got England against Samoa, that could possibly play for second place, first place, third place. We don't know. But then on the Sunday, it looked like a dead rubber when the fixtures were announced earlier in the year. But you got Japan against Argentina. That could be to get out of that group. Tonga against Romania. Maybe not. That's probably a stretch, but Tonga could have an instance where they could get this result and you can get out, or possibly even get a certain result and get third, which means you automatically qualify, which they didn't do last time around. And then Fiji against Portugal.
That's a good point. That in this pool, one of Fiji, Australia, Wales, and Georgia are not going to automatically qualify for the next World Cup. That's mad. Fiji at the moment are 9th in the world rankings.
Yeah, Wales are 10th, by the way.
Yes, I know.
And we've all seen the uncertainty with it. Like, I don't want to just go bashing Eddie Jones for the sake of it, but like we all know where Australia are at, which is they're in a bad place. And I don't like we've discussed this on separate occasions, Huw and I, but obviously Australia haven't had enough time under Eddie Jones to come up with a cohesive game plan in my expectation anyway, and in my sorry if we could edit that out.
No, it's fine. We won't.
Yeah, we'll leave it there. It's just.
Yeah, no, I was just going to say, in a word, do you see them getting out? Fiji?
Yes.
Okay, bold. I like it. You are Fiji getting out. And you can say at Australia's expense if you really want to. But honestly, are they?
Yeah, why not?
Okay.
Why not?
That's what we like. And in fairness, Fiji, there is a lot of Fijian players in the top 14. That's where predominantly Fijian players play. They could get a bit of a fan base behind them. You don't know. Like, it could make for an awful lot of fun that regard as well. And we'll finish things off by looking at Pool D hopefuls Samoa. And as I mentioned, they're with England. They're also with Argentina, Japan, and with Chile. And although the Latin America derby might be the most spiciest there, Samoa definitely have a slight outside chance, especially with Japan, who have dipped in form. They haven't beaten anyone in Tier 1 since they beat Scotland, although you would say they're not Tier 1. I'll bring that up again. But Huw, I'll start with yourself. Samoa coming into this, where are they? Like, what's their form? Like, most notably from an Irish perspective, Andrew Goodman and Michael Alaalatoa are there as captain and coach, or vice versa. But just their squad, their form. What have you made of them? And can they? But they could definitely take third. That's certainly within reach. But can they possibly get to second?
Well, I think like you've already said, it's all on that last game. If England lose to Argentina, which is the first game of Pool D, then I agree with you. It's all on the last game. Like you said, Japan, sadly, for all of us, aren't the force they were 4 years ago. But going into that last game against England, it could be all to play for. And I think that suits Samoa way more than it supports England. I don't think that's a place that England want to be in. In terms of results, so interestingly, Samoa have got the strongest results this World Cup cycle out of all the Pacific Island teams, including Fiji. So they are much more winning. They've actually got a better record at World Cups than Fiji as well. So they've won 13 games. They got to the quarterfinal only twice, but they've been really unlucky in some World Cups. They were so unlucky in 2011 not to get out of that pool. They came very close to beating both Wales and South Africa, and then they quite comfortably beat obviously Namibia, sadly, and Fiji as well in that group. So from that point of view, you'd say they're strong. You have to look at who they've played, though. So they've played Tonga 4 times this World Cup cycle. They've played the Maori All Blacks twice and lost to them. They've only played one Tier 1 nation, and that's Italy, and they lost quite comfortably to Italy. They beat Georgia, which is a good result. But yeah, so it's difficult to judge their form, really, based on what's happened so far this year. They probably got the most confidence out of them and Tonga, but they've got the less experience playing the really top teams.
Yeah, and that's a sad state of affairs. You know, we mentioned it on the kind of unfurled pod. I don't like calling it that with yourselves about World Rugby and how they go about things. But the fact that Samoa have only played one Tier 1 team in the last 4 years, like essentially their last game against a proper Tier 1 outfit was against Ireland in 2019. Like, that's essentially what we're looking at here. And that's simply not good enough. And it's not just the Samoans. I know there was COVID and there was that meant a limit on test fixtures. And Ireland were supposed to be having a tour in 2020 down in the Pacific Islands. I think it was supposed to be Fiji, but I'm not sure.
I think it was Fiji.
Yeah. And but simply that's just not good enough. Like they won't improve, but they have good players there. And I suppose if they are going to do it, it would be against the odds, because England and Argentina typically they get their way at World Cups. But can they do it, do you think? Can they get out of the group?
Realistically, for me, they can't. I think they can definitely do a number in Chile. They can definitely do a number in Japan, especially we're all disappointed in Japan's form recently. It seems to have fallen off a cliff. I'm not sure what is going on there. It's disappointing to see. But Argentina under Michael Cheika, I can't see them. And Argentina they're warming up to the World Cup with back-to-back games against the Springboks.
Yeah.
So they're going to be I know their results haven't necessarily gone their way, but they are going to be ready for that group. And I just can't see them overcoming Argentina. And England, look, I know it's their last game. They potentially could have something to play for, but if we're being realistic, especially if they have a couple of injuries to key players, we know that England do have a definitely better strength in depth. So I can't see them getting past England. So realistically, I don't see them getting out. But yeah, it's frustrating that we're having this conversation about the games, but I know obviously we have to factor in COVID. But if we're in this situation in 4 years' time, where are we going with rugby in these parts of the world? And just touching on, I know we've kind of moved on from the Drua and from Moana. Well, we can talk about Moana Pacific a bit more, because we didn't really get into that. But I know we focus heavily on the Drua, but it's really essential that World Rugby continue their World Rugby are backing that as well. So they if World Rugby pull the plug on that funding as well, that I'd be terrified for these regions, because maybe Tonga, as we've said, aren't making a whole lot of progress, but obviously having a professional side, 2 professional sides down there, it has to be a good thing. But my concern is funding, and if they pull the funding. But if Drua's performance this season in Super Rugby Pacific is something to go by, hopefully we won't be looking at that situation. Especially, I was wonderful watching those scenes when they overcame the Crusaders. No one saw that coming. So let's hope that continues. But yeah, on Samoa, I don't see them unfortunately getting out. I think Argentina, not with Michael Cheika in charge.
Yeah. Huw, you want to jump in there?
Yeah, just on Moana. I love Moana. I love watching them play. I love their stash. Everyone knows I love my rugby kits. I've got a Moana hoodie that's 2 sizes too big for me, but I loved it so much that I bought it. There's a question mark over Moana for me. So Moana are owned by the New Zealand Rugby Union. So they're not officially a 6th New Zealand franchise, but they are owned by New Zealand and they play all their games in New Zealand. And their 2 best players in Super Rugby just gone, Tavatava Nawai and Umua, have now both signed for New Zealand Super Rugby franchises, which isn't a great look. Now, all of the information on the Moana website is all about being a proud Pacific community and all the good stuff, which I have no reason to doubt. as long as they're owned by New Zealand, and if their best players are going to be going to New Zealand franchises, and the talk is that both of those players are going to be All Blacks by the time the next World Cup comes around, that's for me is a bit worrying. Also, we talked about Fiji being able to build around Drua. Both Samoa and Tonga can't both build around Moana because, okay, you've got cohesion there and great players there. If the scrum half is Samoan and the fly half is Tongan, that doesn't do you any favors. That doesn't let a national coach build on something. So I hope I'm wrong, and I hope that Moana are laughing at me in 12 months' time. But for me, the jury is still out. I wish them all the best, but I'm looking for a little bit more action from them for me to think that they are the answer for both Samoa and Tonga.
I'll get your winning predictions in a minute, but just really quickly, I'll ask you to put a number in a place in the pool for each side. So starting with Tonga, Enda first. Where are they finishing in Pool B?
4th.
Okay, Huw.
Agree, 4th.
Okay, yeah, but I think we could go full house there. I'd agree. Fiji, are you sticking with Fiji second, or would you even say first, Huw?
Second.
Okay, Enda.
It's got to be second.
We kind of have to say second now. This is adult rugby peer pressure right here. Do you stick or twist with Fiji? I'll go second, and I'll say Wales first. I don't know. I don't know why I do that. I'll just go Wales first. And Samoa, Enda, where are they finishing?
3rd.
Okay, so they picked Japan for that qualifying spot. And Huw, where is Samoa finishing?
Heart says second, head says third.
Okay, I'm gonna go third. I don't see them getting out of the pool myself, and I just haven't seen anything of Japan to make me think they're going to turn the corner. But one thing I have to ask everyone, it's a rite of passage. I ask, are you excited? I also ask who's going to win it. And I'll come to you in a minute as someone with more of a skin in the game, if you don't mind me putting it that way. Huw, who do you see win the World Cup this year?
I think 12 months ago, it was one of the most open World Cups ever. I think with the injuries that South Africa have got, and I think with the Untermack injury, you might say it's only one player. Untermack is huge for France, not because of how good of a player he is, but because of his relationship with not only Dupont but also Ramos. Unfortunately, that's kind of means I'm not backing France anymore. I don't want to say sadly, but just because it's not very interesting. But I feel like the waves are parting and it's becoming a clear run for New Zealand.
Okay. That's fair. I might just jump in before I go to you, Enda, because I have said on nearly every podcast so far that I think France, and that was before the Entmack injury, and I think Entmack's a huge part of that. So I might just take an executive decision not to say anything, because I don't want to say Ireland are going to win, because if we lose, I'll blame myself. So I'm going to take an executive decision. I'm not going to say. But Enda, the floor is yours. Who's going to win the World Cup in 2023?
I keep changing my mind. My heart says Ireland. My head says New Zealand. Haven't seen their form in the Rugby Championship and seen Joe Schmidt's influence on them. But yeah, it's hard not to. Looking at I really want to say Ireland. I think, but we're definitely getting out of the group. But yeah, taking on France and New Zealand. Yeah, I've got it back. I think New Zealand.
It is kind of a toss of a coin though as to who comes out of that top heavy side of the draw, because realistically it could come down to anything. It could be injuries, cards, just general fatigue. You don't know what it could come down to, but it does make
not the bus being late, thankfully.
No,
for Ireland.
Hopefully not. Hashtag adversity. Like Ted Lasso meme will be all over Twitter this World Cup. Don't you worry. But
if
thanks
you want
very
to
much.
See us all over Twitter, if Wales get to a semi-final and Ireland go out in the quarterfinals, I will be all over Twitter. You can rely on that.
Blocked and deleted without a shadow of a doubt. And every podcast you were on, I will edit you out if I have to. No, listen, that could well happen. It's a genuine fear now at this stage because of that draw. But anyways, lads, thanks very much for joining me. It's been a pleasure, and we've recorded 2 in one night with the Owen Farrell one that went up last week. And thanks home to everyone for listening. So if you do like what you see or hear, as always, please do subscribe. You find the links to my channels below, as well as the links to the lads' podcast, but also their Twitter pages. And I should give a special shout out because Enda does a rugby TV guide page, which is going to be very handy come World Cup time with split broadcasters here in Ireland in particular. And Huw does a lot of great data-driven threads, some on even just things like jerseys. Who knew Macron were a great supplier? Well, Huw did anyway. So listen, I highly recommend those, and they'll be linked down below, as well as the Pirate Rugby Podcast. But for now, everyone, and until next time, take it easy. Ooh.